Hey, everybody, welcome to the Tell Me More podcast. We have been, I guess, in this How to Be Married series for the last 8 weeks. We even did a bonus episode, so there's been a lot of content around this. But today, we're wrapping up with something I think is going to be really a fun conversation. I'm joined by Lance and Brandy Salazar, who are... do you still think of yourself as new Church on the Movers, or how do you think of it?
Yeah,
we're like tweens.
Yeah, we call ourselves tweeners.
Okay.
Yeah. You've got the people that have just been here for less than 6 months, and those that are over 5 years.
And you're
in the middle.
between?
We're in between.
Yeah.
We have people that have been here 30 plus years.
Yeah.
You guys moved here from California.
Yes.
We're going to get into all of that story, but you've come here and kind of feels like, in the best of ways, that you've always been here, which is really cool. You guys are family now. And so for the past several weeks, as I've been kind of teaching through this, you guys have been doing, what do you call it? Like a marriage mid-size group is something that we do.
Yeah, during the 11:30 service, we would be in that COTMU room here in this building doing it was going to be a mid-size, but it's kind of turned into a small group of about 12 or 13 couples that have joined us for 6 weeks. Okay. During that time, we started on week 3 during the series.
Yeah.
And
so you've taken kind of the idea was, as I understood it, Priscilla told me about this, was that you guys were going to be doing this, and that it was going to be based off the content that I was teaching week to week. And so I said to Priscilla, sweet, I will be happy to meet with them, and we can talk. I can share in advance kind of what I'm going to teach that weekend, so that it gives you guys a little bit of a heads up. And so what we've been doing for the past 6 weeks or so is meeting every Thursday, and usually an hour, sometimes a little longer, and we'll just talk. It's been really helpful for me, quite frankly, because I get to talk through sort of what I'm thinking about with you, but also get to hear your kind of perspective and experience around this. And I guess you guys are passionate about like helping married couples, and there's a reason for that. But it was so beneficial to me just talking through this with you, hearing a little of your story, that I kind of felt like, I think the best way to end this whole thing would be, rather than just to kind of talk theologically about sort of what we've been learning in Ephesians 5:21 through 33, to talk maybe a bit more experientially, because you guys have lived this. You got a story around this of your own, which is, I think, partly why you're so passionate about this. So I don't know who wants to begin or where you guys want to begin, but maybe just start where you would consider the beginning to be.
Yeah, where would the beginning be? I mean, as far as this story would begin, would probably be with what could have been the end, I suppose. We've been married almost 20 years, but somewhere around 10 years into it, and I'm looking at her to keep me honest on this, we found ourselves separated. Was really what happened. We found ourselves separated. And the long and short of it is we went on this journey to get back to ourselves, so to speak, which found us back towards each other. And we were, for all intents and purposes, very open and honest about our struggles. It wasn't like we were broadcasting to everybody, hey, everybody, we're separated, But we were also not hiding from it. If people were asking us, well, how are you and Brandy doing? I wasn't going to say, we're doing great. So I think that honesty around it and that transparency, if you will, when we got back together, gave other people permission to say us too.
And what did you do?
Yeah, and what did you
How'd
do?
you do that?
How'd you do this? And we're like, we don't know. How did we do this? How did we? So we kind of constructed a way, because we were getting a lot of people asking us, constructed a way to sort of explain what we did. And so out of that came, a ministry, if you will. I wouldn't call it a ministry until really recently, of helping couples get unstuck, reconnected, communicating with each other, alleviating the stigma around not talking about their marriages. And that's kind of what has led us here in some ways. I mean, to give you my own little perspective too on coming to Tulsa, was leaving all that behind.
Wow.
God was really in the details in a lot of that, because we came here and I'm like, well, I'm starting a new job. We're starting a new life in Tulsa. I am done helping couples. I am done with this. It's heavy. It's hard.
Yeah.
I would get attached to folks that weren't quite figuring things out. I'm like, it's really not that hard. But it really story actually is. But one thing has led to another, kind of through Pastor Lee Martin, and saying, hey, you guys have done some stuff. I'm like, well, you must be stalking us on the internet, because we're not talking about this, because I'm done with it. But God has kept pulling me back, and I think a lot of this isn't, for me, an act of obedience, and now knowing that I must do this. I know her story and her perspective is different from that. She's been kind of waiting for me to say, yes, I need to be doing this, so.
Yeah, the Lord spoke to me louder early on in our journey of helping couples, and I just knew that this was what He's called us to do.
Wow.
You and I, or you spoke about this a second ago, but the Lord takes us through things so that we can share.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think it's part of our work in the kingdom. And so when the Lord brought us through the other side of this in such a beautiful way, to go from feeling like there's no hope and you want to leave your husband, to falling back in love with him and actually enjoying his company and being able to work through conflict like what felt like grown-ups. I felt like there was there's no other reason that it would be so beautiful than to help others. And so I continued working with couples through this process. I continued working with couples when we moved here, just over Zoom. And so for me, when Lee said, will you do this mid-sized group? I was like, oh, absolutely. I talk about this stuff all the time.
Right.
But for Lance, he was like, oh,
I'm like, I don't know.
maybe. And so again, what's interesting, because we've talked about this surrender piece, that this has been
surrender for you guys.
Or surrender for me, or submit for me, because we had a online business about this topic, and he was done with it when he started his new job, and so it just got set on the back burner. And what's interesting is the way that the Lord has resurrected it in a way that is even more beautiful, because since coming here and learning about the Bible and really having true biblical literacy now, especially after going through this series, has been incredible for us and in this ministry. But to partner this more secular approach that we had before with what we've realized was God was always in it, because it all just marries right together so beautifully.
Right.
But to have this new foundation has really created something even better than what it was before. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I would say we were very practical and tactical.
Yes.
And
we are.
I felt, biblically, like I didn't know, how can I really talk to people about marriage here when I don't really understand the Bible very well myself? But I think a lot of that has shifted and changed through your teachings.
Yeah.
And COTMU.
And COTMU.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, why don't we start at kind of the beginning of your stories and just talk about, so you said you found yourself separated. What led up to that? What was kind of the precursor to that, if we can share that?
I would say that we were like most couples.
Okay.
It was a typical story of, meeting on the internet and falling in love. And when we had kids, we both had our careers when we met. When we had kids, our marriage was immediately deprioritized. It was just this, both doing our jobs, keeping this kid alive. And I mean, really, that's how it felt for a while in the beginning, sleep deprived, a lot of those, normal things. And then, let's have another one. And so it just like compounded it for us.
Wow.
And, it's not, we don't like to blame our children, but we weren't ready to weave kids into our marriage. It wasn't,
Parenthood just exposed the already existing selfish nature in the two of us, that egocentric, career-centric, selfish nature that could essentially kind of exist as a married couple, but when having children and becoming parents, that really exposed all the cracks in the armor. And,
so we became bad business partners is really what it was, and now we call it this partnership loop that we got stuck in. And it was like, do you have the kids, or you put the wrong shoes on, grab the lunch, get the, soccer practice and all these things. And we got stuck in this place of finding a lot of resentment and frustration with each other, and really just this big divide in our marriage. And we don't have a story of any large betrayal or we don't. And so
But what you're describing is really typical too.
It is
though.
very
It
typical.
You use the word partnership loop.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that when you have a busy lifestyle, there is a lot of logistics. It's like running a business.
Yeah.
You know, you've got finances, you've got
Sure.
parenting your children, keeping your house clean, ordering
Yeah.
the, plethora of supplies that it takes to run a household.
Sure.
And it's a lot of work. And so when you have that plus 2 careers plus, hobbies or whatever else, the first thing to go for us
Wow.
was hanging out with each other, maintaining our friendship, continuing intimacy and things like that. It was just we were too busy, really. And so,
Yeah.
we just stopped liking each other.
We really did. And I think there was also
We
this
did.
bit of yearning for like how it was when we were first
Oh, wow.
married or
Yeah.
dating, right? You want to like look back and say, look at all these things we used to do. And now, and then she would even say, I don't even like you breathing around me
That's
anymore.
very true.
And
I
she
did
got
not.
the resentment and contempt really started to build
Wow.
to a place where she's like, you need to move out. And actually, when she
Wow.
told me that, I honestly wasn't surprised. Sort of stepped back and said, well, here I am actually, my story was I was depressed. I wasn't happy with where my career was even really going. She was in a business in commercial development where things were thriving. I'm watching her be successful. And I'm sitting here going, I hate what I'm doing right now. And I don't like myself. I don't like myself as a husband. I don't like myself as a father.
Wow.
I'm not surprised she doesn't want me around.
Yeah, and I truly didn't. It was hard because I was at work where everybody's telling me how awesome I am.
Wow.
And this is a very common story as well. Where when you have a career that there's a lot of success in it, and you have
true.
people, especially even employees or people in the community saying, "Oh, you're so awesome," and then I'm coming home to this guy. I was like, "What is?" And 2 little kids that are needy and
wow.
and it was just like there was a lot of. I would come home and it felt like there was a lot of tension, but it was hard for me because I just simply, and you said this, nobody teaches us how to be married. When it came to business, it seemed so logical. It was like, create this vision,
Yeah.
and right, there's these boxes to check.
Yeah.
You have measurements. You have, ability to quickly improve by taking action. I'd come home and I'd be like, what do I even do with this?
Right.
And we were both feeling the same way.
Wow.
So me asking him to move out, there was a part of it, do you think was mutual?
No, I did. Well, in some ways, no. I mean, I was kind of at a place where we'd had struggles before, so I just kind of came to this.
Was this sort of an acceptance of the inevitable?
Yes,
There
it
you
was.
go.
It was
Yeah.
an acceptance. The
All
one
right,
thing
I've been
I
waiting
was
for this.
the
Yeah.
one of the turning points for me was at least I remember having the wherewithal stating that I'm the common denominator here.
Wow.
I think one of the things we talked about, and I know we kind of had this backwards, but I think it actually helped in the long run, was that we really had this desire to show our daughters what a thriving marriage
Amen.
could be. But it wasn't with the 2 of us. And so we thought, well, maybe actually getting divorced and meeting somebody else that is more
Crazy.
suitable might show them what a
Crazy.
great marriage could be.
Wow.
And so I went through
Yeah.
this thought of, well, I
Amazing.
can't bring this same Lance into the next relationship, so I am going to improve
amazing.
myself. I'm
is
going
what
to
happened.
improve myself, and
That is
through
amazing when you think
yeah,
about
it
it.
is. I mean,
He gets
I'm
a
like.
coach. He starts going to the gym. He's
I started
like,
doing all sorts of different things. I'm like, well, whatever I've been doing the last 10 years is not working. So I need to
So in
change.
preparation
I'm like-
for someone new.
I'm like, who's this guy?
So, a little bit of time goes by and she's like, well, wait a second. I actually really like this. I don't want to call it a new Lance. I think in some ways it was getting back to maybe who I was before.
I met,
a little
really.
bit of that. Yeah. But being more confident, being more secure, being more comfortable.
Well, it reminds me. So when the very first week of this series, I think the line that I wrote down was something like, "The greatest enemy in your marriage is not your spouse, but something like this, but it's you.
It's you.
You will be the one that you'll have to work most on.
I can't control her. I can't rely on her to make me happy.
Right.
I can control any of her reactions or anything like that. And so I kind of went through this whole, well, I can't make it any worse. So maybe I can actually lean in and step into, the doing something else, being more confident and comfortable. A lot of men, I think, get worried about rocking the boat. They get, women generally. I mean, I know I'm generalizing or stereotyping here a little bit, but they're more emotional generally than men, and generally are much more open to say, this marriage isn't going very well. Something needs to change. Or I think men are more okay with the status quo. It's going all right. Nothing's really happening good, bad. So it must be going okay. So I'm just going to leave it alone because I don't want to rock the boat and have her reject me, react negatively or whatever else. And I let go of that attachment to how she was going to react to anything that I might be doing. Because a lot of men would say, well, maybe if I do this, she will love me more. Maybe if I do, it's manipulative and it doesn't work.
That's what I was going to ask you. Okay, so I'm wondering if somehow you kind of backed into something really useful here, and that is that you were, in some sense, would you say you were working on improving yourself, changing some things about you, just for the sake of changing some things about you, not in response to I got to try to save my marriage.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, and I think that I got to try to save my marriage is the wrong. I mean, I wouldn't want to tell somebody don't bother fighting for your marriage. I don't mean that in any way, but I think when you make that the goal, the trouble is often that you won't get the result that you're looking for, especially in the short term. And so what it means is that when you don't see the changes that you were hoping to see, you tend to lose some of your motivational steam and you run out of gas a little bit. But if it's I've got to change, then that kind of transcends even the marriage, and I think it allows you to withstand some of the setbacks that you're likely to entail. I will tell you this: I think especially in marriages where there's been a betrayal of some kind or some kind of broken trust, I think sometimes I think this could probably go both ways, but I could definitely see it maybe from a wife to a husband who's trying to gauge whether or not he's trustworthy, is that she might be, I don't know if it would be consciously, but maybe let's say consciously or unconsciously, intentionally difficult for a time, just to see how. In other words, you might, like as a husband, you might be doing everything you're supposed to do, and you still won't get the reaction that you're hoping for. And maybe she's waiting to see, and how will you react then? Can you endure that? Can you endure it?
Yes.
And I think if your goal is, got to save the marriage, you're likely to break at that point, because you're not really interested in becoming who you need to become, period. You're interested in becoming who you need to become to get her to accept you, take you back, whatever, say everything's good. So I'm wondering would that be an accurate description?
That's a completely accurate description. And adding to that too is that a lot of, and I'm going to speak for men because that's the experience I had, and I've been talking to other men, it's similar. They often want that change to happen right away too. There's a lack of patience. And well, I've been doing this. I've been doing what you told me for a week, and she hasn't changed. I'm like, well, first of all, you're too attached to the change itself, and it's not going to happen in a week. It's that whole idea of trust is lost in waves and it's earned in drops. So it's just going to take a lot of time, like she even just said, to build that trust up. She's trying to make sure that, or Brandy was trying to make sure, I'm going to follow through with this.
Yes.
That this is not something fleeting, right? That I'm going to do this for a week or 2 weeks to sort of earn her love back, and then suddenly I'm back to that Lance that I was before.
There's another part to this and I think this is both for men and women, but I know you and your energy better than most. I had lived with you for almost 10 years. and been married to you, had children with you, I can tell when this isn't real. I can feel the lack of authenticity in this and what your motivation is. I know your motivation sometimes more than you know your motivation.
I totally agree with that.
I do, because I can feel
Totally
your
agree.
energy when you walk into the room and how you're acting and if you're tiptoeing around me or if
I think that
you're-
goes both ways.
I
Husband
agree.
and wife.
It goes
Yeah, for
both
sure.
ways. We know
Absolutely.
each other in some ways better than we know ourselves.
I 100% agree with you. In fact, it's part of my study for this in the completion weeks, talking about one flesh. I read a sermon by Tim Keller, and he said the exact same thing. We know so there's something beautiful about that, in that I can say things to my wife about her that that might be insightful for her, even about herself.
Yes, that's
and vice
beautiful
versa. Yeah,
as
it is
well.
wonderful.
I think I have that note right in here. I know it's getting a little off subject, but Brandy, I mean, in speaking how far we've come,
Yeah.
we were having a meeting with actually Dave Jewett, and
yeah.
and he was asking me directly, like, what are all the things you're great at and good at? I'm like, I don't know. And Brandy's like, they're writing in this
sitting
note.
next to him,
and she wrote this
writing
note
things
while we were
down.
meeting with Dave Jewett. I keep it with me all the time when I need to remember, like the
That's
things
so
that
good.
it's such a gift, but that's a testament to her knowing me better than I know myself sometimes.
Okay, so you guys were in California when this separation has happened.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay, tell me kind of spiritually, where are we at this point? How would you guys describe it?
such
So,
a-
it's an
it's tough.
interesting one. So we were both believers when we met.
Yeah.
And we had some church hurt early on when we had our first daughter. So that would have
Yeah.
been 2008.
Yeah, we had just gotten married. Actually, we got married in that church. We were
Served
very
in that
involved.
church,
We were
yeah.
helping with the youth. I was involved in worship.
Yeah.
And we felt like we had Huli, our oldest daughter, and then felt like we got kind of burned.
Okay.
Yeah,
but it's-
not only did we get burned, but there's a difference, and I don't think that this doesn't happen in other states. I do, but there's a huge difference in the types of churches that we were finding in California
Okay.
in theology and the way that
interesting.
at
they
least
were.
the ones we were.
Yes,
Okay.
that we were finding, and so it was this belief that we were going to take her home and teach her about God ourselves.
Okay.
And our kids never had a consistent
Yeah.
church experience. They both loved the Lord. I mean, I've shared this with you. I was raised by a hippie Jesus freak, Lonnie Frisbee's wife.
Yeah.
Yes, and so we had just a very radical, love for Jesus and the way that we loved and worshiped him. But as far as studying the Word,
Yeah.
really some of the New Testament, like I would go through the story of Jesus with the girls and things like that, but it wasn't we lost that foundation.
We did. We definitely
Yeah.
had. And we kind of moved around a lot too. So I think
we
there was
did.
this lack of finding a stable
So you
foundation.
didn't have a lot of grounding.
No,
is what you
we
were
did
saying.
did not.
Okay,
We did
and,
not.
and maybe not a community for you as well, that you're part of, like a
Correct.
real church community that you're
Nope.
so you're sort of processing this a little bit alone. Maybe there's some ideas that are cultural, whatever, your own best wisdom, whatever you got. that you're
Amen.
just trying-
Yes,
okay.
our own
Okay.
A lot of that. And
Okay.
not really even understanding the word covenant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're just trying to
trying to-
you're just trying to figure it out as you go.
Yes, we're
Okay.
kind of winging it
Yes.
in some ways. I mean, we're being intentional, but for me personally, I wasn't like I was walking with Christ, at the
right.
time when this was all going down.
You believed in Jesus.
I
Absolutely.
did,
Yeah,
You
but-
speak
but-
of us
yeah,
all the
yeah,
time
yeah.
from stage.
Yes.
I know what you mean.
Yes.
Okay.
But what's interesting is that the day that I came back to Lance and said, we're not going to get a divorce.
Wow.
Not only are we not going to get a divorce, but we're going to create something amazing here together. And it
Wow.
was having a coffee with a Christian mentor of mine.
Wow.
And she had had a couple of divorces. And she said, you have no grounds with Lance.
Wow.
She said, you are two wonderful people that need to figure it out. You are smart.
Wow.
You have all of the capability that you need, and you need to put your foot down, draw a line in the sand, and do this for you and for the girls. You have a commitment to each other. And I was
Wow.
like, and I walked through the door and I said, okay, we're not getting a divorce.
So how long were you separated at that point when that?
We don't
so
remember.
We don't honestly totally
Yes,
remember.
Is it weeks? Is it months?
Probably months.
Okay.
This is a blur, to
Okay.
be
Yeah,
honest. This
I get it.
season was dark and heavy and
Yeah.
awkward, to be
Kinda
honest.
don't want to remember.
Yeah, he's still living in the house, sleeping in another room. Like, it just was a weird time. We didn't say anything to the girls yet. They were little.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's interesting, and kind of going back to the part about where this big shift happened, when people started asking us, what did you do? We sat down with each other and asked, what have we done here? Like, what was the process? Because this was now months later.
Okay.
So we go on this journey. He starts working on himself. What's interesting, as the Lord would have it, is I have a coach at the time that I share with him that he was a business coach, and I share with him, I'm struggling in my marriage, and this is what's happening. And then I go home and he starts calling me out and saying, well, what about you? What kind of energy how are you treating your husband? What kind of energy are you bringing to this? What kind of energy are you bringing home when you've had this stressful day at work?
Wow.
It sounds like you're this, hard driving, emasculating woman.
Oh, man.
And I'm like,
wow.
whoa, this is when we're separated. And so as he starts working on himself, I start working on myself.
Yeah.
And he gives me this first task, and he said, I want you to go for 2 weeks and not direct and correct your husband.
Oh, man.
And I was like, easy. Every time I failed, I had to start over. And it was hard. And it was
Wow.
little things like I said, grabbing the kids' shoes, or, helping with whatever it was. And it was like in these little ways, it was almost criticism.
Yes.
It was these little criticisms
This is
that
the
I was
thing.
doing all the time to this poor man living in my home.
Like I felt like I could never win.
Yes.
Like that's how
Yeah.
I felt.
And
I
that
could never
was
gain
me.
any ground. I could never win.
Yes.
Wow.
And so as he's working on himself, I start to see these things about myself. I become an observer, and I'm like, you're horrible to this person.
Wow.
Why aren't you being kind to him?
Wow.
He's a nice guy.
He can't win, yeah.
He really
Yeah.
couldn't. And this
Wow.
man's name was Rock, that was coaching me. And he was a very strong, masculine man. And he would just call me on it. He'd say, all right, tell me this week, how'd you talk to him? And I was like, oh boy. And then I have this friend of mine, this mentor, say this thing to me. And so by the time we start working on our relationship, I really wanted to. Like I
Yeah.
really saw
Wow.
this part of myself that I wasn't being a good wife. I
It's
wasn't
amazing. So
even
you
be a
moved from
friend.
this contempt, because contempt is one of the. In fact, I think it's in a Malcolm Gladwell book, Blink. He writes about this I don't know if psychologist, whoever, who can predict
Gottman.
with some like
Yeah,
you know
it's
this.
Gottman,
Okay,
yes.
like
John
90
Gottman.
something percent
Yes, accuracy.
and contempt is like the number one thing
It
they're
is the
looking
number one.
for. And when contempt enters the marriage, it's over.
Yeah.
And this
That was
kind of
us.
subtle eye roll, and to hear that you were there.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that because it's hard to love someone that impossible that you have contempt for when you just look at them, you're like, you're pathetic. That kind of feeling.
And imagine feeling that.
I know. Yeah,
as
right.
the other person.
Right.
And it's hard. You said this, I think, in the first week of this selfishness part. And I am a very selfish person by nature. And it was hard, so hard. And honestly, it was painful to see this about myself.
Yep.
It was awkward. And I honestly didn't know where to put my arms when I got
Yeah,
home. I
yeah.
was like, so everything that comes out of your mouth is rude and mean? What do I even say? How do
Wow.
I say that? And so it was relearning how to, and I shared this with you, that when I started to look at my husband the way that the Lord looks at him and love him in a way that you're my friend and somebody that I love and adore.
Wow.
And you said this last week of I'm for you.
Yeah.
In our meeting you did.
Yeah, and I said, and so and I think it's interesting what you're saying, because again, the starting point for all of this is as long as I am looking at the other person saying, it's you,
Yeah.
you're the problem, then all sorts of things can grow there. Again, bitterness, contempt, a lot of malice, a lot of things that, the Bible specifically says, get rid of. In fact, I think it's in Ephesians 4. Just before this, you'll find in the passage just before, I think he says, get rid of all malice, slander, like put it all away. So it's this kind of attitude. And I think when what can do a lot of that is when you start to allow the Lord to deal with you. It really takes the spotlight off of them, and almost, it doesn't mean that the way that he behaves or whatever doesn't matter at all, but your focus is in such a different place. It changes things. And honestly, I think it puts you in a position to then begin to love someone else
Yes.
instead of constantly, pointing the finger at blaming them. So it sounds like amazingly, in God's grace, both in your own ways, you started from the starting point that you have to start from, which is, all right, I got to deal with me. You were doing that, Lance. Brandy, you were doing that as well from the place that you were at. So, yeah, what happens from here?
I remember
the Post-its on the.
Yeah, well, it was funny because people did ask us. This is just this little side story. It's kind of funny, People were asking us, "What did we do?" And we're like, "We don't really know." So we sat in front of our sliding glass door, which is these are things in California. We actually put one in our house here, but I know in Oklahoma, sliding glass doors, they're just not as popular. But we had the sliding glass door, and we got these Post-it notes and just started writing things down on Post-it notes and putting them on the sliding glass door. And out of it kind of came 4 themes. But I should back up a little bit and say what we had decided was that, okay, we love each other again, but how do we stay this way? We don't want to slide back into the same patterns that we did before. So we got away from this idea of fixing what was broken and casting a vision for what we wanted the marriage to look like. So if we're looking out that direction, how do we get there versus just like trying, because anytime you're just fixing the broken things, you're just getting back to the starting line.
Right.
So how do we cast a vision and get to there?
Would you call that a common horizon?
Common horizon?
Yes.
Yes. I mean,
See what I'm
when you
saying
said
about-
use that language, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we were
Yes,
doing.
we
Was
call it a
finding
shared vision.
Yeah.
But
in
I
what
love
we
common
teach.
horizon.
But this
I
is
love
better
that.
because what's happened to us, and this has just been this most beautiful part of our journey right now, is that we've had this content that we have taught and coach on, and then all of a sudden you say a term, and we're like,
That's what we've been saying.
that's what we've been saying. But this is a biblical way.
In beautiful
In
way.
a beautiful way, because a common horizon is so much more beautiful than a shared vision. But that's what
I
it
think either
was.
one's the same thing, but you're looking, it's like, okay, what are we, you started a dream together.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
About what your future would look like. What, do you have any memory of what
And
those things were?
Yeah, absolutely. And even what it would feel like for us to be married together.
Oh, wow.
What would a
And
beautiful...
you were writing all of that down?
Yes, and so we
Wow.
would sit and we would have these conversations. And, we had shared with you that we were doing this thing called the Miracle Morning on our own, each one of us individually. And when we had started to work on our marriage, we started to do part of it together. So we would come together and we would sit and we would do these.
It was just us getting some intentional time together because we're like, wait, we're doing these two things sort of separate, but why can't we do some of this together?
Yeah, and to keep some of this momentum and to have these conversations about what we desired. And this was another thing that we were talking to you about is a big thing that we realized is that, one, we were going to mess up. That the things that I desired for him, to show up to the marriage and vice versa, we were going to mess up. So we needed to create a safe space to consistently give each other feedback.
And this was your morning.
This was our morning, yes. And so then
grace.
we moved
gave each other grace to mess
in
up.
a healthy, safe container to have real conversation with each other. That we took our marriage from the lens of, if we're going to get good at this, we have to get good at this together, and it's going to be two messy people learning something together. So you're going to mess up, I'm going to mess up. How do I gently say, hey, you said you were going to do this yesterday and you didn't. How can we do better today?
Having a space, interesting, I think probably having a conversational, relational space where that can happen probably keeps things from building up. Us exploding on each other.
Yes.
It feels like, there may be frustration, but it's like, we're only just a few hours away from having a space where I can safely tell him and he can hear it because he's ready to hear, or vice versa, because we kind of know and expect that that's part of what's going to happen here.
Yes, but we also have praise in that. Like one of them, it's TEAM, and A is appreciation. And so one of the things, and this was one of the things my coach had me do after I had to stop directing and correcting him, is start to look at where he's amazing today. I want you to start to pay attention to his greatness and see where he is doing really well, and I want you to tell him about it. And so that was one of the things that we added in. And so for me to start to pay attention to him, seeing how he's interacting with the girls, seeing how he's helping around the house or treating me.
You're just looking at him through a whole different
new lens.
Yeah.
Yes, instead of you're an idiot, I'm now saying, right.
I'm searching for
I'm
things that are good.
searching for the good, intentionally searching for the good.
That would
So
change.
it changed everything for me.
It's a whole other side story, really. But I think a lot of what happens in couples too is that when you talk about pointing of the finger, it's because that particular spouse believes that the other should be good at the same things they're good at.
Right.
So good.
So Brandy was like, I'm
Right.
so great at all of these things, yet
Yes.
you're so terrible at them, and so you need to change and be more like me or more like
You know
this.
what's interesting is I learned that, and I've learned it in my marriage too. But I remember specifically learning it with my dad because we worked in partnership for so long, and there were certain things that I was passionate about that he just never seemed to care as much about as I did, and I would let it eat at me for the longest time, and finally, kind of the realization, and there were many moments where the Lord had to kind of drop things into my heart. But essentially, what the Lord told me was, if he cared about the same things that you cared about in the same way that you do, what use would there be for you?
Yeah.
You're here for a reason to champion certain things because that's the gift that I've given you. He has a different perspective. Don't be mad that he doesn't share your same convictions or passions about everything. He's got a different view on this, and that just really helped me to go, I don't have to be frustrated because he's not viewing the world or acting upon it in the same way that I would. We can kind of complement each other in that way. And certainly that's true for Heather and I. I think early on it took me a long time to see some of that because it's easy to look at your spouse and go, you're doing it wrong.
It is.
You're doing it wrong.
Yes. There's a better way.
Yeah, there's a better way. Okay, so there was something in here I wanted to think about or talk about. You talk about celebrating Lance, and we had a conversation about this, and I don't know if it happened in here or where it began to happen. We talked about on the week, I talked specifically about submission, and you talked about how that was a tough thing for you, and was So I don't know if that happened in this season or whatever. If this is the beginnings of some of that journey,
I would say this is where
why it was so important for you.
This was where the seeds were planted.
Okay.
In the beginning. Fast forward a few years, and when we still lived in California, it's actually COVID that caused me to dive into my Bible. I just started to freak out, and I did just for so many reasons, layered, and so I just dove into worship and my Bible, and the Lord kept bringing me to that word, and so for with Him in what was going on in the world, and I kept finding it about my marriage. And so we just will pick a word of the year to have a theme, and for each of us separately. But the year before we moved, I had my word be submit. Wow. And so I just started studying this word and thinking about how it applied to me and thinking where I was struggling or where I wasn't submitting. And really, my relationship with the Lord and the relationship with Lance was, I will be kind, I love you, but I will not submit and surrender. I'm still in control, is really what it came down to. Yes.
We're learning a lot about Brandy on this podcast, right?
I just had this need, even with the way I parented, I just had this need for control, and
Interesting.
Yeah, it was for safety. I have a lot of dysfunction in my family, abandonment, addiction, abuse, and all of this.
The world's just better when we're in control.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't trust you. I got it.
Do you guys do that? Or are you an 8?
3.
You're a 3. Okay,
yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm an 8. So both of those have some strong control tendencies.
Yeah, very, very controlling, and in a way though that was socially acceptable.
Okay.
Yeah, I was socially acceptably controlling.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, well, where there's
kidding.
these heavy-handed controlling people where you see them and you're like, oh, yeah, let's stay away from that. I can feel it. Like, I was still kind about it. I was just like, this is just how we're going to do this.
Okay.
Yeah, I just had it all planned.
With a smile
for
on your
us.
face.
Yes, absolutely.
You're
We
going
will
to love
kindly
it.
do it
You're
my
gonna
way.
Love it. You're going to love it.
So I had to try this word on. And I will tell you, this was probably one of the most uncomfortable things, was to learn to trust Him and the Lord in a way. And, I shared this with you, but it was obedience to the Lord for me to become have submission to Him.
Wow.
That had to be first, because I had to trust God so much that I could begin to trust Him.
Wow.
And it was a practice. It's an everyday thing. I think a lot about addicts when I think about this stuff, because, in like AA, they talk about, just today. I'm not going to drink just today. And, whatever else. And that was really how it was for me.
For you to just think about, how about just today?
Just today. Yeah. Or just this moment. And I started to look at these wins, and this may sound crazy, but I looked at them as miracles.
Yeah.
That this woman at, I'm 45 now, 40 years old, is trying this new thing on that's so scary for her, and she's doing it. And she's doing it. And I'll tell you that having that perspective of thank you, Lord, like for helping me today and helping me do this. And I think it is more important than we realize as women. For me to really have a connected, deep oneness with him, I have to submit.
So begins with appreciation a few years earlier.
Yeah, good.
And then this kind of starts to flow. That was kind of the next step of this.
The next level, yeah.
Interesting. How did you experience all of this, would you say?
I think it was a gift. All of it is a gift in many different ways. I had struggled with confidence, in the first half of our marriage. I mean, even still times I fall back into that way of thinking. I think a lot of us do it. I'm a perfectionist. I want people to like what I'm putting out there, whether it's my personality or whatever else. It's just all of that. I'm concerned with how others think about me. And in that perfectionism, I think caused a lack of confidence because I was unwilling to sort of put
especially if you're
myself
being
out
criticized on the regular too
Right,
at home.
right.
Yeah, really.
So all of these things are a gift that allow me to freely sort of be confident, to make decisions, to take not control, so to speak, but actually have influence.
Yeah.
Brandy's a strong personality. She has her own opinions. She has great ideas, but we allow each other to influence the other. I know we like I said, in one of our meetings, we talked about this, where we have these lanes that we operate in.
This
We have
was
these
really good.
agreements where this is Brandy's lane, this is Lance's lane, but it's not that I don't have influence in her lane or she doesn't have influence in mine. I'm not operating in a vacuum. I'm not operating, on my own without her having input and vice versa.
Let's talk about this for a second because we talked about this on the week of where we talked about submission and headship, and it was really, really interesting for me and helpful as I was kind of thinking through the sermon. You talked about lanes that you guys have developed for each other. So let's get practical. Like, what does that describe? That when we talk about a lane, we talking about like an area of responsibility.
Yeah.
Yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we're the head of, essentially.
Okay, so like how would you, can we break
Yeah,
that down practically? What does that look like?
From a practical perspective, it's really a matter of having, these conversations with each other about that whole, let's say that common horizon, that vision casting, whatever it is,
Sure.
and all of these things that we have to accomplish, the roles, right? The parenting pieces, the financial pieces, the whatever pieces, all of those things
So
that
you have
actually.
a lane that's like, okay, finances are going to be my lane. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
like finances
we've
has always
shipped
been
back
his
and
lane.
forth,
Okay.
and now,
Yeah.
in order for her.
Parenting's my lane. We have 2 girls.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's and even little aspects of the parenting might be
Yeah,
mine,
true.
but
That's a good
there
point.
are, and we talk about them. It's not like I've just assumed this role without communicating that with
Sure.
her. We talk about those things. It's like, okay, here's this. How do we want to tackle this? Who is going
But
to
then I'm the
own
driver
this?
and the owner of the thing that's being moved forward.
Sure.
if
There's an
it's mine.
agreement. There's not this lack of talking about it because then it's like we don't know what the right hand and the left hand are doing, the
Yeah.
head and the body. We don't
Yeah.
know what the head and the body are doing.
Wow.
They've
It
got to
makes
work together.
It makes me think about, there was this part in like my side of the story that this aha moment that I had was all of these things that you have done to build these companies. Why can't you just apply this to your marriage?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's the same. This casting a vision, creating a plan, having the action steps, checking back in. Did that work out? Oh, it didn't
Sure.
work. Nobody's mad. We're just going to
Sure.
try a new way. And so that's essentially what this was, is we said, okay, like he uses football analogies, I use business analogies. And what I say is like, I don't look at my CFO and say, oh, you didn't get that marketing campaign done well, so, you're on probation. No, I look at the marketing guy and say, how'd the marketing thing go? And I look at the CFO and I ask them about the finances. And I'm not comparing the two and saying, well, you suck because you're not good at that. And so when we sat down with this roles and responsibilities conversation, which is in the partnership element, we said, okay, here's all the things that we have in our lives. And it was this huge, whiteboard that we just brain dumped it. Okay, who's naturally good at something? Great.
Right.
Circle that in a blue pen, circle this in a pink pen. I'll take those things. What are the things that you actually enjoy doing?
Right.
He doesn't mind doing the dishes. He listens to a podcast or whatever else, and he'll just kind of do the dishes.
Yeah, so that'll
Doesn't
be your
bother him.
responsibility.
Yeah, so you don't mind doing it. You take it. Great. I don't worry about
and
that.
I can't get our 13-year-old to do it.
Okay, so here's a couple things I have to kind of reacting to what you're saying.
Yeah.
One is, so one, this is so good. And two, when I think about Heather and I'm like, okay, so this is not how we're wired up. Like we're not make lists, like we're not as organized and we're not very consistent. That's the other problem. It's just like any sort of system we try to put in place, we won't really honor the same way because we're not wired up like that.
That's most people, though. You have
Yeah.
to remember that. So
Right.
are we. We fall off every system that we create. But true, once you have the system,
Yeah.
you can fall back.
Okay.
Once the house is a tornado again,
Yeah.
you've got the system. You know who's
That's
on
nice.
first. Yeah.
Well, and Heather and I were talking about this the other day and I was actually relating some of the stuff that we've been talking about, and I was like, okay, so we're not going to do like a regular morning meeting, but what we've got to find some pattern that allows us to
Good.
communicate with each other in some way. And I think, I guess the reason I'm bringing some of this up, and there's a couple things I want to bring up, but one is just, you're going to have to find your way to, like, it's going to show up in
good.
a lot of different ways. Some of us are like, you're the furthest thing from business minded as Brandy's talking CFO, marketing. It's like, oh my gosh, that's not how, like Heather doesn't think like that at all. So how would but we've got to don't let the language keep you from feeling
Good.
like I'm not,
Right.
motivated like that. I'm not like a list person. I'm like a set goals and achieve them kind of person. That's not even my drive. But don't let that keep you from thinking about, well, you've got to find some way. I think what I'm hearing here is that there's probably a kind of underlying theme with a lot of what we're talking about here. Something I've wanted to get at for a minute is communication.
That's good.
And what I mean by that is more than just, hey, you're picking the kids up today. But I'm talking like deep communication where you really are sort of getting underneath the issues. I find that, this happens a lot. I try to talk a little bit about it this weekend. We talk up here on the surface so much. And our frustrations or whatever is up here. We don't even really understand ourselves. We don't even really know what we want. We don't even really know what's going on the inside of us. And to take the time to sit down to try to understand yourself, to understand your wants, and to verbalize those things, which can take some real effort. I think there's a ton of couples walking around that have a lot of buried feelings, hidden from their spouse, hidden from themselves. They don't even know. Some of us have never even bothered to ask the question, why am I so angry? Why am I so, I'm just frustrated, but you don't even know why.
Yeah.
And a lot of us, we just live these busy lives and we just keep bouncing to the next thing. Maybe there's some of us that feel a certain sadness, but we don't understand what that is. So there's certain feelings that we have that we're not really trying to process. And it sounds to me like through this, I don't know, this sounds like it might have been a few years of working through this, but there probably had to have been a ton of conversations where we're understanding ourselves, where we're getting to know what, I really would like to look after that piece of kind of our relationship. I'm passionate about that. Oh, okay. Cool or whatever. Like, am I reading that
No, you're
accurately?
100%.
No, you're 100% right.
And I think that's part of why I said when I was figuring out how to submit, I had to ask myself why.
Yeah.
Well, because your dad left.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the male figure in your life said, I'm out of here. You can't trust people.
Wow.
Right? And so if I didn't get to the root of why I struggled
Yes.
with that and learn
Yes.
to heal and re-love that part and realize that he's not your dad.
Yep.
He's not the people that failed you when you were a child. I wouldn't have been able to really do it.
Wow.
You have to go deeper. And then why am I criticizing him?
Yes.
I'll tell you why, because I criticize myself.
Yeah.
I'm really hard on myself. And so that whole thing where we wrote this on the board during one of our groups, and it was something about the way that, you blank, and it was something positive. The way that you understand the gospel is the way that you will, give grace to understand the grace of the gospel is the grace that you'll give to your spouse.
Yeah.
The way that you have self-criticism is the way that you're going to criticize your spouse.
Okay, wow.
The way that you have an internal anger is the way that you're going to be angry to your children, your spouse.
Absolutely.
It's just a reflection of what's going on inside of me.
Heather and I were having a conversation about that this week. I'm not going to go into the details because it's pretty personal. But yeah, it's stuff that's going on inside of me that I'm allowing to pass through me and hitting other people, and it's hurting them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and unless you kind of recognize that, I guess that's what I'm saying is that if you don't have, where do we have to communicate that kind of stuff, or to really sit and think about it and be, in some sense, challenged to in a loving place. This is what I was talking about listening this last weekend.
Yeah.
Just letting your wife or your husband, I suppose, finish a sentence doesn't mean they've really finished speaking. Because feelings are just hard to get out. It's hard to go, that's what I'm feeling. That's why I'm feeling
And the
that.
bigger and the deeper they are, the harder it is.
Yes.
That's where the real stuff is, though.
And it's challenging because, let's take a couple that is struggling right now that's, they got some deep-seated issues and they're trying to figure out how to communicate. And you want to get to those real deep self-awareness things that are going on, to strip back and peel back the onion and say, why am I this way? But honestly, I think you would agree, you can, of course, disagree, but I think we would often say, start slow. You can't always go jump into the deep end of the pool right away.
Yes, you have to create the container.
We have to create the container. We
Yes.
started this communication journey with each other with table topics.
Yeah.
We would simply sit with each other and pull out, who's your favorite superhero? Stuff like that. Simple.
Just
Your
learn to
most
communicate
embarrassing
in the
moment
business
as
of
a
it.
child.
I realized I didn't know her most embarrassing moment as a child. And some 10 years into
I didn't
our
know you
marriage.
used to sit for hours in record stores in LA, and your mom would just drop you off when you're a teenager.
Yeah, and so we started just telling stories to each other about our youth, things that we just didn't quite know, and all that did was it gave us the practice of communicating. You can't run a marathon tomorrow. What do? You start off with a little bit at a time.
Good.
You get a little bit of a longer run. Holy smokes, I can run 26.2 miles now.
Yeah, it's that bit you were talking about with trust as well. Trust coming in drops and being lost in waves. And these little conversations are relational trust building moments. It's empathy as well as developed because you start to know where he's coming from, where she's coming from, what shaped you, how we think about ourselves, all these things. You can start to see someone in a completely different light. So we were kind of talking, kind of a little side. No, it's so good because it's been helpful. We were talking about submission and you kind of learning to step into that role, got us into talking about lanes as well. How does it function? Because submission was one of those, for me, it was the hardest week of this series, easily, to preach. It was so hard to try to put all that together and to say, just for a variety of reasons. But when I was sitting down talking with you guys about it, it felt like, it didn't feel contentious.
No.
And so talk a little bit more around that. Like, how have you guys navigated that? What does it look like for you?
Well, yeah, you go ahead.
I was excited about it. I think your face when I was like, I'm so excited about this topic, you're like, you are? Because I'm not.
Exactly.
So that was the reaction I got out of you. And I think you were like, you're kidding me. But what's interesting is I think that it's made the biggest impact in our marriage.
I remember you saying this.
And I'll tell you, the beginning of submission for me sometimes was just closing my mouth. Like just observing and not always giving my opinion. And because I had to just, again, I keep saying this, but all of these things that we're talking about are a practice. You're trying to change behavior. You're trying to do things in a new way. And so I had to be gentle with myself, but it was a practice. And what started to happen, just like when I stopped directing and correcting my husband, and all of a sudden he started to become a different person in front of me.
Wow.
It
Started to happen again.
It started to happen again. And I'm like,
Wow.
oh, wow, he's a better leader than I thought he was. Oh, wow, I have an opinion about things that, quite frankly, don't even matter.
Wow.
Like, why do I care about this so much that...
Well, and when we talked to, and you said these things from the stage, was that I think the challenge with submission is a lot the way culture has looked at that word,
Right.
biblically, right? And I know I know you guys have had this conversation during this podcast series,
Sure.
so I don't want to go too far deep into that. But that, I think Brandy has done a really good job of, even ahead of, I know she got a lot out of the message, but she'd already been kind of studying
Sure.
that, knowing what Paul really meant about submission. And it wasn't just, the whole make a sandwich kind of thing and just, letting your husband do everything and that you just roll over and
Right.
be a doormat. That wasn't it at all. It said, I wrote down here, submission doesn't mean the wife doesn't get her desires met.
Wow.
That's really important. And I think Brandy understands that submitting in our marriage didn't mean that I'm suddenly the ruler of everything that happens in the house,
King Lance.
and having that frame of mind and understanding it, I think went a long way in helping us. And I hope that other couples heard that too.
What did it feel like for you? So when she's starting this submission journey and you're kind of, are you aware of that? Did it feel like something that was
Oh
conscious?
yeah. I mean, just in our nature, she
We
told
talk.
me.
Yes,
we
I'm
talk
like, here we
so
go.
much. We talk every day. Like she's like, this is my word of the year, and this is what I'm going to do. And so I knew she was working on
Wow.
this,
Okay.
and so, but I didn't get into a space of like, you're not submitting properly, because I wasn't exactly sure what that. I wanted it to maybe it was her journey, even though it was impacting me.
Sure.
She was the one that was having to work through
Wow.
those feelings
So
and
you're
what
really
what
gracious.
God was
That's good.
calling her to do in this relationship. But I will tell you what it did is
Yeah.
it did allow me to, like I mentioned earlier, feel more confident, more comfortable, more like my voice, really matters. It sounds funny for a husband to say that, but in our relationship, I was challenged with that sometimes and being worried about how she might react to something I
Yep.
might say or do or consider or suggest or recommend, any of those things. And those feelings
Wow.
of that are washed away, knowing that, she might say, nah, that's really kind of a terrible idea. But at the same time, I'm also not triggered by it either, knowing she's on my side, she cares about the success of our marriage and this family, that she's not saying, that's a dumb idea for the sake of shooting me down. It's really, we'll have a constructive talk about those things. It's just allowed me to feel freer in expressing,
Wow.
and leading in that way to say, what do you think about this?
Well, it reminds me of Philippians 2 when it talks about Christ taking on a role. It says he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, or other translations say something to cling to. In other words, this kind of authoritative position of being God, he did not cling to that, but he humbled himself, became a servant. And so there's this, the way I see it is kind of this assuming this role of serving the other in even in very practical. The example, the literal example that Christ gives us is the washing of the disciples' feet, to
Yeah.
which they respond, or Peter responds, "No way." And so it's almost like, this is beneath you, and I won't allow this. But Christ says, if you don't let me do this, you have no part in me. And so there's this assumption of this role of servant. I think there's something really powerful about that that happens when we just say, I'm taking this on. And it sounds like that's what you did, and even in the most
I
practical
did.
ways.
It is liberating.
Wow.
It is. And I think about this career
good.
that I had
Yeah.
that, where it was like all these external accolades. And I don't get a lot of accolades in my life now. My husband or my kids, and I mean, my friends think I'm great.
Yeah, but it's not like they're having awards ceremony.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Mom of the
Which
year.
is which is in business. I mean, that's a thing.
Oh, you're in
There's plenty of
magazines.
that.
People are
Absolutely.
asking you to speak, and
Oh,
you're
yeah.
like, "Oh, yes, I'm a big deal." And I look back on
Wow.
that season, and I was like, it was pretty empty,
That's amazing.
really. And now I feel so fulfilled in these little simple moments of
amazing.
watching my teenage daughters come out and be like, "You made banana bread?" Like, it's simple.
You know, there's a
That's
piece of
incredible.
this, though, that I want to recognize in Brandy and her pursuit of Christ over the last few years, and her relationship with him as causing her to be so filled and fulfilled that serving in whatever capacity she wants to serve in comes without any expectation of a return, because she's so full in Christ that freely giving, in whatever that might be, is easy for
I
her,
would
right?
say that is the first step.
Yeah.
It is. I couldn't
yeah.
do this if I didn't feel the love of the Lord the way that I do. If I didn't spend time sitting, and now that the school year has gotten busy, I sit at the feet of Jesus less than I do today. Over the summer, it sounds crazy, hour and a half every morning.
Wow.
I will sit with the Lord, read my Bible, and now it's hard because I have to have a kid here by 7:30 in the morning,
Sure.
and the morning's just rushed, and I find myself slipping. I find myself having my feelings hurt by my 13-year-old.
Wow.
And I didn't feel that when I spent more time grounded in the Lord.
That's amazing.
That-
That's such a
that's
good word,
the
and that's
shift.
what we really need to talk about, because so this was something that as we met every week, we just kind of kept coming back to, and I tried to include it into the series, but was that you guys kept responding to in the things that I was saying, which was it really does start with this, I would call it kind of gospel renewal, personal thing that's
100%.
happening on the inside of
That
you.
is a
if-
daily practice.
Yeah, talk about that for a minute, how you guys experience that.
Yeah, here's what I can experience. I can experience the difference between when I am faithful in my spiritual practices and when I'm not.
Wow.
I can feel it almost immediately. It's the same thing that we say that when we're not doing team daily,
Yeah.
we can feel it. We feel the drift start to happen. I feel my confidence and submission start to slip when I am not in the Word. And it's
Wow.
not just being in the Word. It's the allowing myself to feel the presence of the Lord.
Wow.
Allowing myself to feel
Yeah.
the love of the Lord. I will tell you,
So it's not just reading some verses.
It's not just reading
it's
some verses.
experiencing it here. I
Here.
was talking about this maybe a week ago or something
did.
like that. Yeah, where it's like if this isn't happening with you on somewhat of a
Where it
regular
wrecks
basis.
Yeah, you said, if the gospel doesn't wreck you,
Yeah,
Yes.
with some regularity.
then you're doing something wrong. You're not fully,
yes.
Yeah.
present with it.
I think what happens, and this was certainly the case for me because I've been a believer my whole life, was that it was easy to see, the cross as, okay, yep, believe that, and maybe even feel something toward it every now and again, but rarely. But then most of my life is sort of lived on the other side of that, just sort of like, okay, now what? And so the cross becomes this kind of thing in the background, just sort of was there. And now teach me about, hearing from God or how to pray or whatever. It's like and so I had this sort of view that like the cross, the resurrection, the gospel, let's say, was sort of this intro to Christianity that you needed to adhere to or agree to get into the club. But then after that, we were going to talk about, all the ways in which God would, make your life better. And what it did for me was it made me, God became a means to my end. So he was a part of my life. But insofar as I was heading here and I needed him to help me get where I was trying to go, and it was only when I started to realize that I didn't really love God for God, that I was using him, so to speak, to get, have my life the way that I wanted. I was very religious. Then that I really start to change and shift when I started to see how religious I was, how easily I would judge other people. How easily I would talk down to other people or all of these types of things. And so when I started to see, how religious I was and how gracious Christ had been, that's when my life started to change. And to the degree that I remain connected to that reality. Now I see I'm trying to find the gospel in everything, not just as those kind of basic beliefs
Right.
that I had to have to kind of get in the door of the club. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about is this. Yeah.
That was the shift. You have to make that if you truly want to submit, though.
Yeah,
It's
wow.
that's the door to submission. That's the first step. If I wasn't able to do that, I just think the submission would be fake, and there would be a lot of resentment.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
it wouldn't. I would.
Right.
I would wake up
But now it's
irritated with
you
them.
submit to one another as out of reverence for Christ, and that's what this is happening, or as unto the Lord, right? It's
Yes.
happening. That's the deepest motivation, is that I'm doing this out of service to the Lord. And if it gets disconnected from that, what I'm hearing
It's
you
not
say,
real. Yeah, and
it's not as real.
it's and there's again resentment's the word that starts to come up. I start to feel like a victim.
Hmm.
When I'm not doing it from a place of service to the Lord. And the other thing, just from a practical perspective, when we think about what it takes to live a life today, it's very practical. There's dishes that need to be done. There's kids that need to be picked up. There's, food that needs to be made, groceries. It is a lot of practical stuff. And somebody should be doing it with joy, because life would really suck if everything that we're doing that has to be
Right.
done all the time feels like this chore. And don't get me wrong, I still struggle with laundry, but
I think everyone struggles with laundry.
yeah, it is. It's something that still gets me. But I do ask for help, though, more. Well, I'll say,
Wow.
I even have a daughter that'll say to me, Mom, just ask me to unload the dryer.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I do forget that as a mom sometimes, that it's okay to ask for what you need. But
Yeah.
it is practical.
We've unpacked a good part of this journey here, and clearly, I mean, just even listening to the way you guys, and as I've got to sit with you for the last several weeks, but I mean, I can hear it in the way you relate to each other. Nothing's perfect, but there's a mutuality here and a serving that I can hear happening in both ways, both directions. It's really that's what we're looking for. What would you, as we kind of near the end of this, what would you guys? Are there any sort of I don't know, anything that came out in this series, or just anything that as you're meeting with couples, maybe we'll put it this way, maybe as part of your group that you're like, this was a big thing that maybe we haven't talked about yet, but would be worth sharing or kind of thinking about before we wrap this up?
I have something that I really was impactful to me in our meeting last Thursday that had a lot of impact in our group on Sunday.
okay.
And it was that question about, what does marriage teach me about my relationship with Jesus, and vice versa? What does my relationship with Jesus teach me about my marriage? And that just opened up a floodgate of comments from the group. And, we even took a picture. We had a whiteboard and we're writing down the things people were saying. And a lot of it goes with, that whole fulfillment in Christ and being able to freely give or whatever else. But my story was to that. I know that when I'm not really studying His Word and connecting and have maybe drifted a little bit from my relationship with Him, is a direct correlation to how my relationship is with Brandy.
Wow.
Others talked about grace. They
struggle with grace.
who start struggling with grace and remembering the grace that Christ has for us, and also being able to, okay, I need to be able to remember to give that to my spouse.
Yeah.
It's amazing how quickly we forget what kind of grace has been extended to us, how quickly we just assume or maybe live sort of like we are responsible for who we are, like we are in the sense of like we've put ourselves here. I'm good because I've done something, and instead of seeing God's grace and everything that we have, every good gift that we have comes from Him, that where would we be without Him? And so then to turn around and be able to offer that to other people, remembering that. But I so quickly put myself in I'm the good one category.
Yeah.
And you're the bad one. And it's easy to do that well beyond my spouse with just other people online, whatever. Get judgmental, feel like I know what I've got things figured out. You're a moron here, and it's easy again because I'm losing sight of grace, and so rather than seeing my spouse or my kids as someone who is in process that the Lord is working with now, and to graciously try to walk with them toward where the Lord is leading them, yeah, I mean, I have to keep myself in mind for that to be possible. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Do you have anything that you wanted to talk about?
I did. I wanted to because you brought this one up in, the deep knowing, which John Gottman talks about that as well, the importance of friendship, and how becoming a student of your spouse is a spiritual it's a spiritual practice. That if we are called to be disciples and students of Jesus, and our relationship with him is a mirror of our relationship with our spouse, it's no different. You said when they get done talking, how many questions did you ask? And you said, start with 1,000. Yeah, about 1,000. Start there. And truly, and maybe that's over time, obviously. Logistically, we can't ask 1,000 questions. But for me to listen to what he's saying and probe and go deeper into the conversation that he's having, so that he can start to self-discover, so that I can start to really see into the window of his heart and his desires, and vice versa. I think that's really where the most special marriages happen.
You said this last week, and I didn't get a chance to work it into the sermon but I thought it was a really good point, that if you want to know someone, you have to study them, and the same is true for Christ. Your relationship with Christ, you're not really going to know him until you begin studying him. And I think that's a part of your guys' journey that I don't want to miss. I think you've talked a little bit about this, but I get to hear you when you guys have served in Next Move and talking about your kind of biblical literacy and all of this growing since you've come to COTM is a lot connected to you knowing the Lord through his word. Yeah, talk about, and what is that?
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a big can of worms. I was saved at 19 years old by hippie Jesus freaks on, a weird experience. But what's interesting is they taught me how to love Jesus. Okay. And they did that so beautifully. And they, for the most part, stayed in the Gospels. They loved the book of Acts. Like that was literally what they were, playing out. And so what happened is that just because of my beginning starting there, our beginning in our relationship, not understanding the Lord's word, I think this is true for both of us, we created our own God. There is this
wow.
Yeah, you do. If you don't know if I don't know you, I create my own beliefs about you.
Yeah, wow.
It's like this whole thing that happens on the internet where you see somebody post something and you're like, oh, they must be a whatever, right? Insert the word. And so, I started diligently reading my Bible the year before we moved here. We've been here a little over 3 years-ish. But when we started going to COTMU, and I had just finished reading the Bible cover to cover the first time when we started COTMU. And I that was helpful, actually, because things didn't feel so foreign when I started the class. But Blake goes so deep into these principles that as Christians we really need to understand that it changed everything for me. Wow. It changed everything. I'm actually going through it a second time right now.
Are you really?
With our 16-year-old daughter.
Oh, that's awesome. Come on.
Yes, at the same table. It's incredible.
Good.
We went through it the first time together, which I highly recommend as well, because guess what we got to do laying in bed at night? Talk about it. Yes, amazing. We got to talk about our homework. We would do our homework together.
That's good.
Have conversations, but it changed everything. Really knowing, even going back to the Old Testament of knowing Yahweh and seeing the threads that the Trinity, right? It's the same. Right? The character is the same. The character doesn't change. I always thought of God as the bad guy and Jesus as the good guy.
Wow.
I did. That was
interesting.
Yes. And so everything changed when I really started to understand. And what COTMU did for me is it gave me a hunger for the word in a way that just reading it cover to cover wasn't able to do for me.
Yeah, and you guys are talking about kind of, and we'll close by talking a little bit about this marriage ministry that you're so passionate about. But one of the things that came up in our conversation so often was, oh, this is so good because we're getting to kind of connect the biblical principles that we find in, let's say, Ephesians 5, Genesis 2, things that we've been talking about, going, okay, some of the stuff that maybe by God's grace you fell into one way or another, because we say all truth is God's truth. There's nothing that's true that doesn't belong to God, whether you realize it, came from him or has roots in the Bible or not. God's gracious in that he revealed that to you or whatever. But now kind of connecting those things together has given you maybe a stronger foundation. How would you say that in terms of the way you're thinking about this material?
Yeah, well, and having our weekly discussions with you and the messages that you've delivered from the stage and the other pastors as well related to marriage has, at least for me, given me a lot of freedom. Well, I also looked at some of our practical approaches as being just that. Oh, it's just this practical stuff. It's not biblical. And starting to recognize, as you just sort of mentioned, it all pointing back to Jesus.
Wow.
All pointing back to that. I even used to go through this cycle of, well, these books really helped me when I was struggling in my marriage. They're non-biblical. And I'm like, and I used to be afraid to share about them because they weren't biblical. I'm like, oh, wait a second. Actually, this points to here because Whit told me about this. And so this actually goes here. And so it's given us this newfound language and freedom to say it's okay to teach about this because look where it is in Scripture, which that's not what I had before.
That's cool.
Coming here and
we felt that we were teaching on your behalf of the church.
Right.
So when we were put in that role of teaching mid-sized groups for couples, we wanted to make sure that we were staying within the church
guardrails, if you want to call them that, or making
this
sure
is your congregation. And so when we were doing that, we didn't feel in the beginning that we had a lot to work with,
or that we were qualified. Right? I didn't feel qualified to be. I'm like, I can tell you where to put your hands, like Brandy will say, put your hands and put your feet from a practical perspective, but where is this biblically?
In the Bible.
So I felt almost fraudulent in some ways around it, and being here and going through these things with you and with the messages it has.
But then God qualifies. Once He calls you, He qualifies you, and that's what's happened.
Cool as I'm sitting down sharing with you, okay, here's what I'm studying out of, Ephesians 5 this week, and I'd start sharing some of this stuff. You guys would come alive and go, well, that's this. We've been, here's how we work that. Here's where that showed up in kind of our marriage practice and so forth.
Yeah.
And so and it was that was really beautiful to see.
So that's really where we're at, is where, the church has asked for a marriage 101 course.
Yeah.
And for every married couple or plan to be married couple to go through.
Yeah.
And to be able to marry these things together of say, this is what covenant means, and this is how we practically play this out. This is what, the gospel in your marriage means, and this is how you practically, the Sermon on the Mount, that was another thing that was powerful for us, actually. Your Sermon on the Mount series, when it comes to marriage.
Yep.
Yes, mind-blowing. But to be able to marry these things together and to obviously work with the spiritual formation team to now put this together is going to be an incredible opportunity for us to just see the beautiful work that the Lord has been weaving in our lives. To see this come together, it feels like such a gift.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, well, it's goals with this. I know, there's a lot of the practical pieces of it, and I think we shared this at the beginning, but, and I think maybe this had gone into some of the catalyst behind even doing this series, is that we're not talking about marriage enough. People are hiding in the shadows, feeling that shame or that embarrassment. And I just want this congregation to be open and honest and saying, we're struggling. Let's talk. Let's get this out in the open. And
we all struggle.
We all do. There's no shame or around this.
Right.
This is
at least there shouldn't be.
There shouldn't be.
And if we can, as a congregation, start with this little small group that we started during this series, that then grows and becomes a congregation that doesn't have the stigma around talking about the struggles that we're all having in marriage, and which it's hard to change and hard to get better if you don't talk about it. You got to bring light to it.
Yeah, you said something on that podcast, and I know I've shared this with you, about a congregation you had seen that they had this really low percentage of divorce rate, like this less than 5%. I'm like, and that was actually a big aha for me. I'm like, imagine that.
Imagine if Church on the Move could move
towards that, where we can openly talk about these things, get better, our marriages becoming a witness, to other struggling marriages, to say, this is what it could look like, this is what it could be like, but we need to openly and freely talk about it in a very safe and comfortable environment.
Yeah.
So you guys, right now, we're working toward, with spiritual formation team, working toward creating a marriage 101 course. Is that what we would kind of call it?
Yeah, it would probably be a class.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't started working with the spiritual formation team yet.
Yes,
they
now
don't know.
that we're done.
We're letting them know on this podcast.
Yes, Blake, we're coming for you.
And Angela.
Yeah, but creating the outline based on your sermons,
Right.
creating the outline, pulling the practical part in, and having the spiritual formation team help us to put it into one of these beautiful formats that they do,
Yeah.
for their small groups and mid-sized groups.
And this would be for anyone married 70 years. Well, that'd be a lot.
Everyone.
We want to learn from that. Oh,
But
we had this couple
married
in our
10
small
years or
group.
5 years or a year?
They've been married like 26 years, and they didn't come from a place of like, we know it all. It
Oh, they
was
were
more of like,
wonderful.
oh, we've messed up here and there. And it was such a gift because we had, these newly married, we had engaged people in our group, and we had folks that were married 20 plus years, that it was just beautiful to see this open dialogue around struggles. What's working? What hasn't been working? Where did we mess up? Where could we have done better? And it was just, I'm
And
like, this.
and to also change the narrative around this is a marathon.
Yeah.
We're in this
Yeah.
for a lifetime.
Yeah.
So hop on and try working on things today
Yeah.
or improve or
And don't wait till
Yeah.
you're in
No.
full-on crisis mode.
No.
Hi, we're getting a
Obviously-
divorce.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
It's like, I mean, obviously we're here for you if that's the case, but yeah, I mean, we don't have to wait till then to admit, okay, maybe we need some help, but maybe be a little bit more preventative with this. When are we thinking that this will be available for people to jump in and be a part of? What are you hoping for?
Ooh,
I think
I don't
that's
know.
up to Priscilla, Chris, and Blake. Yeah.
Okay, but like
Yeah.
maybe 2025 sometime
Yes.
is
Yeah,
when we're
yeah,
thinking.
and we'll
so-
continue to do the monthly group, and we'll, I'm sure, be doing a
Yeah.
mid-sized group of some sort as well.
Yeah,
but
we'll continue our group that we have right now
Right.
once a month here
Right.
at the church after
cool.
service. And then in January, we're going to do a couple vision workshop
Okay.
with these same couples. And I mean, obviously invite more
Invite
couples.
others.
Yeah,
So
we'll
if
invite
somebody's
others.
listening to this and they're like, wait a minute, you're going to be meeting once monthly? I'd love to, or maybe just get in contact with you guys to figure out what's the best way to do that? How can they get connected to what, like
should
this
they
group and
email?
all of this? I'm
Yeah.
not sure. Is it,
Yeah.
maybe it's Brandy.
Yeah. Do you want to
like
email me?
how would they get into the group, or is it already, that's kind of like done?
That group's done. This was our
Okay.
last week. We
Okay.
followed your
but
sermons.
the thing that you're doing monthly,
Yeah.
is that the same group that you were just meeting with?
Yep.
Yeah, but we'd like to, I mean,
I
there's.
think
we
here's what I'll
invite others
say.
along.
It's going to be on cotm.info.
Okay.
We'll have
Okay, cool.
someone help us get it on there. But
Yeah.
I would just look up monthly marriage group.
Okay.
That's
you can
what
see
we'll
how
call
much
it.
I'm in charge of around here. huh?
Yes.
Exactly. We're like, we'll get
You're like,
somebody
what do we do?
that isn't Whit.
I work here, but I have no idea.
Yeah, we don't work here, so we don't
We
have
think
church
we know
on the-
people we can find to help
Yes,
us with that.
people
Wow.
can help us, but it'll be on cotm.info. We're hoping the first weekend of each month.
Okay.
Similar to Daughters and Brotherhood.
cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
just follow the same rhythm.
Okay.
Just
and
without food,
Well,
probably.
we'll try
Oh,
to
maybe
let
we
you know
can
about
figure
this,
out
like,
food.
Maybe through some kind of announcement or something.
Yeah, do an announcement. Yeah,
Okay.
that was good.
You guys have been awesome. Lance,
thanks.
Brandy, thanks so much. It's been a cool journey just being able to walk through this series with
Yeah,
you guys.
really
Yeah,
nice.
we're gonna miss our Thursdays,
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
but
fun.
it's been
Yeah.
great.